Okay, so welcome everyone to the Reclaim Network Plus webinar series. And this is the webinar number 21. So we have come a long way since we started almost a year and a half back, almost 2 years back actually. So if you don't know, the Reclaim Network is funded by the UKRI. So that's basically the three councils, EPSRC, NERC, and AHRC. And that includes actually the 5 partners from Surrey, Bangor, UKCH, Bath, and Warwick. Next, please. So so this is basically the team who has been kind of contributing to the different strand of the network. But we also are supported by our network, the team, Mark Siemens, Salat, and Dr. Cesar Dable. Next, please. So I think the network has evolved quite a lot over the last 2 years. So we'll be completing 2 years in February, end of February, and we have another year to go. So this was basically an extension we got. So that's a fantastic opportunity. But as you can see, we got around 553 members so far, and they come from almost over 40 countries, representing the different, the area that include research, NGOs, consultancy services, government, businesses, community groups, and so on. And they have a wide variety of interest as well, and that can encompass from public health and well-being, going to the different type of green and blue infrastructure, but also the planning and governance and so on. So this webinar series basically is every Wednesday, every month, which is between 12:30 and 30:30, and usually we got 2 speakers, and we try to kind of combine them with having the people who are coming from the non-academic background, and some of them are more academic, just to bring the diversity of the talks and present their experiences in terms of the implementation of green and blue infrastructure. So there were like 2 interesting talks last time around, and you can view those talks on our YouTube channel. So if you're not a member, then you could just visit the network website, which is reclaim-network.org, or you can write to us on info@reclaim-network.org, and you will start getting the information there. So before I introduce our next speaker, so there are a couple of things which I just wanted to highlight there. So the first one is that these webinars are recorded, so you could refer back to them anytime in future if you want, or you can share it with your colleagues. So you could, we'll paste the link, and you can always go and look back onto those webinars. There is a chat function there, which usually we use with the speakers, but we would encourage you to write your questions using the Q&A button. So you can see a Q&A button on your screen. So write your questions. You can write your name and your affiliation if you want it to be read with the question. So what we are going to do today is there are 2 sessions of 20 minutes each. There are 2 webinars, and in between the webinar, we will, after this webinar, we will have a Q&A session. So we will not take the questions in between, rather take it in the end. And I've got my colleague, Dr. Neria Calavilo, so she will be chairing that session, and she will picking up your questions and parting it to the speakers. So without further ado, so we have got 2 fantastic speakers today. The one is Thuy. So she is a PhD student at the Centre for Environmental Policy at Imperial College London, and her research focusing on strategies to improve the current planning and management of green spaces to ensure they are inclusive and considerate of different community needs. She's interested in exploring the potential of a co-design approach in designing solutions that can foster environmental, economic, and social sustainability. Thuy is also the part of the Imperial team who won one of the large projects which were funded by the university, and that is possibly be the topic of her presentation today. So she will be presenting her work in that. So I'll introduce the next speaker later on, but I can pass on the floor to Thuy for her presentation. So welcome, Thuy. Over to you.
And hi, everyone. Thank you for having me here today. So let me start by sharing my screen first. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so thank you, and allow me to introduce myself again. My name is Thuy, and I'm currently a PhD candidate from the Centre for Environmental Policy at Imperial College London. And it's a pleasure for me to speak on behalf of the research team, which includes me, Dr. Alexandra Collins, and Dr. Tilly Collins, on the project that we have been working, looking at the co-design approach in green space development. So before going to the details of the projects, which has been funded by the Reclaim Network, I would like to touch upon the concept of co-approaches. So co-production, co-creation, and co-design have gained traction in academic and political domains likewise. They actually emerged separately in different fields and are characterized by decentralization and increased collaboration. And in those approaches, the relationships among stakeholders contributes greater decision-making autonomy. And such stakeholder collaboration has now been used in different disciplines, including social sciences, business management, computer science, and also environmental sciences. And many studies have of green spaces have adopted co-methodologies to include and involve the local communities in the research and solution developing processes, and also to bridge the knowledge practice gap. And I think bridging the knowledge and practice gap is actually the main purpose of co-methodologies. In our recently published article, which is a systematic review focusing on exploring why and how studies on green spaces use co-approaches. So the figure that you can see on the slide right here demonstrates the range of activities used in different phases of co-production, co-creation, and co-design studies. So in general, as you can see, the range of the co-production, co-creation, co-design processes, co-implementation, co-decision, and evaluation. And certain activities such as site analysis or literature review happened only during one phase. For example, literature review happened during the pre-intervention phase to provide the basis for later analysis phases or co-production phases. Some activities including interviews and surveys, however, were used in several phases from intervention to evaluation. And the variability in the activities used, including surveys, interviews, and workshops, including creative activities such as mapping, photo, voice, and drawing, was quite substantial. That's one of the key takeaway from this graph. And the lack of detail, however, of the specific procedures of their choice and use, how different views on study design were reconciliated or negotiated during the process, makes a comprehensive or coherent understanding of co-approaches quite difficult. And if I could also provide another analysis, then actually the terminology is quite ambiguous as well. They're also not kind of a concrete understanding of the descriptions of co-methodologies, make it highly challenging for future research to replicate the methodologies presented here. So in that systematic review, we also provided an analytical framework that aims to leverage the understanding of the relationships between co-production, co-creation, and co-design. It positions each process and demonstrates the research phases it includes. And also, this analytical framework demonstrates the factors influencing the process. And as you can see, it includes the institutional policy support, engagement strategies, social support, and also adequate infrastructure. It also outlines the outcomes from conducting the processes, including improving stakeholders' experiences and co-created values, stakeholders' resources, capability ecosystem, and green space resources as well. So overall, this framework provides a guidance for future research in exploring the definitions, methodologies, activities, factors, goals, and outcomes of co-production, co-creation, and co-design in green space study specifically, and also a guidance for our Reclaim project. So here we have the Reclaim project. We conducted last year, specifically focused on conducting surveys, semi-structured interviews, and focused group discussions with different active and visual elements. So the primary objective of our research was to understand challenges associated with community engagement and social inclusion by fostering collaboration and emphasizing the roles of the local community members. And instead of extracting knowledge from the communities, our research functions to develop and test a tool to really empower the community to voice their concerns. And local communities can then actively contribute to deliberations, discussions, and also the decision making in a meaningful and critical manner. Using participatory co-design approaches, we aim to blur the boundaries between researcher and participants, thus promoting a community academic partnerships with shared leadership in planning and evaluating green space intervention. And this the figures showing on the screen here demonstrate the flows of our research. So we split our research into 3 different phases: problem scoping, intervention development, and analysis of the outcomes. In the first phase, which is problem scoping, survey and semi-structured interviews were conducted to scope and assess the currently available evidence to understand the general picture of the topic. And again, I want to mention that the systematic review was conducted prior to the project and really provided a foundation on how the project should proceed and what methodologies we should include. And so data gathered in the problem scoping phase helped identify the issues at hand and inform the topics discussed in the second phase, which is the intervention development or the actual co-design process. And so in the second phase, we conducted focus groups. We designed the focus groups to be an open and inclusive platforms that really allow the participants to discuss and produce ideas to make green spaces more accessible and also more inclusive for them, and to build trust between participants and to ensure that the process is engaging. The focus groups included various activities, for example, photo voice, making collages, and then we moved to the third phase, where we carried out an impact assessment to evaluate the outcomes of the co-design approach. This provided very important insights into the effectiveness of the activities carried out in the intervention development phase, and also provided recommendations for the future research on future practices. And we adopted a case study approach to provide evidence for the holistic conceptual framework and to provide insights into how green spaces could be improved in a specific context. And the survey was applied to a representative sample of the UK population to understand the perception of the public regarding green spaces and public consultations. But for interviews and focus groups, then we trialed this co-design method with the community living in the London borough of Hammersmith and Fulham. And we really deep dive into the specific concerns of the people living in this borough. So why is the London borough of Hammersmith and Fulham such a great case study? So this borough is considered highly deprived of green spaces and its green space provision to meet the needs of its diverse population. And also the racial and ethnic makeup of the borough is very dynamic as well. And so as you can see from the map, the borough actually has approximately 48 parks and open spaces. And according to the London Borough of Hammersmith and Fulham report, their own report of the borough, 19% of the surface area is covered with green spaces, but this is actually 12% less than the London average. And also, the report also shows that more than half of the households live in the 5 of the 16 wards, lack adequate access to nature. So that's why we really wanted to deep dive into this borough to really understand how we can improve the green spaces in the area where there's such a dynamic demographic populations. So as mentioned, the first action that we did was to create it and conducted the survey. So the target of the survey was the UK population, and a total of 415 adults, UK residents, responded to our survey. And the sample closely aligns with the UK government data on ethnic groups. For the semi-structured interviews, then again, we conducted them with people living in the London Borough of Hammersmith and Fulham to really understand the individual perspectives regarding green spaces and also public consultations. The nature of the interviews was semi-structured in order to provide participants with a room to fully express themselves, and also for me as the main investigator to probe when clarification was needed. And the key topics that we really deep dive on is their thoughts about green spaces. Also, another focus is how and why they participate in public consultations, their perspectives on the format, use, resorts, the necessity of the public consultations, and also their suggestions for improvement. And on the right hand side, I have a table showing the results, the basic results of the semi-structured interview. So overall, we were able to conduct 23 semi-structured interviews, and actually we didn't gather any personal identification information due to the ethics protocol, but the details of the participant components as demonstrated in the table were based on my own observations and also the mentions voluntarily by the interviewees. And we have quite a balanced group of participants as well, both concerning sex of birth, nationality, age categories, and especially there are 4 people who never or rarely use green spaces, which provided a lot of good insights into how we can better improve green spaces, not only for those who frequently use them, but also for those who have rarely engaged with them. And moving on to the next co-design phase, which is the intervention development, we conducted focus groups and a total of 3 focus groups. And the purpose, again, of the focus group was to recognize the differences and consensus aspects related to public participation and green space design preferences. And as you can see from the figure, this is actually the structure, the general structure of the focus group. So the focus group discussion, we designed them to include many different active components to really promote engagement and ownership by the participants. So participants were invited to participate in 3 short Menti surveys, which were placed in different phases of the focus groups. There were 2 at the beginning to really facilitate the engagement and also to gather the inputs. But there was another, the final Menti survey, placed nearly at the end of the focus groups to have us with evaluating the impacts of the activities involved in the focus groups, and also to gather the final inputs on how the process has gone and the changes in their perspectives. And also within the focus group, there's also an activity where they co-creating a collage beyond the photos that they brought to the focus groups, and then involved actively in various discussions. And while I was the facilitator for the focus groups, I actually stay more in the background and really allow the participants to be the owner of the focus groups and really express themselves. And this table demonstrates the basic information of the focus groups. So Overall, we conduct 3 focus groups, with the first one having 5 people, the second one 4 people, and the last one 6 people. Each group has quite a good mix of people of different sex, birthplace, age groups. And again, we did not ask for their demographic information, but the information provided in the table was based on observation and mentions by participants themselves. And within each group, there are also people who rarely or never use green spaces. And that is our effort in trying to engage them, because we really wanted to understand what the discussion would be when there are people who are actively involved with green space, but there are also those who rarely or never use them, and how we can really create consensus and navigate through the discussions between this group of people. So this slide demonstrates the collages created by each group. So the collages created by the 3 groups actually share certain similarities and differences. Particularly, all 3 collages included natural features like vegetation, water features, and large open spaces for an engaging and relaxing natural environment. In addition, all the designs also incorporated recreational activities. Clean and large walking trails and paths also a key element to ensure that the green spaces was suitable for recreational use and could really promote physical activities. That actually one of the main key focus for the participants when they join the focus group and when they try to create the collage. And amenities and infrastructure like shelters, seating, restrooms, picnic areas, and playgrounds were mentioned quite frequently. And safety features, especially like lighting, were highly crucial as well. And so for analysis, we created different causal loop diagrams to understand the factors and dynamics in effective co-design practices. So the causal loop diagram that you are seeing on the screen right here is still a work in progress, but it demonstrates many different components and how they interact with each other and how they contribute or deter from the co-design, from effective co-design practices. So overall, our initial findings shows that inclusive organizational arrangements, considerations of different contexts, and procedures lead to effective co-design practices. And these overall results in increased social capital and prosperous outcomes, such as informed decision-making and improved capacity of different stakeholders. And the successful implementation of co-design practices also bolster positive power dynamics, which in turn contribute back to the gathering of social capital. And overall, the causal loop diagram implies that the relationships among factors are very dynamic, and the effectiveness of co-design practices can change in response to different external factors that are difficult to control, like socioeconomic and cultural contexts, or internal factors like personal values or organizational structures. So my last slide is on lessons and next steps. So we actually learned a lot from this project. We really learned that getting the community involved is very complicated, but highly important as well. Authentic co-design process transcends beyond finding the right tools and techniques for promoting public involvement, and to really promote interest and resource investments from all participating parties. We understand that the roles and relationships between them should be cultivated, and the value of diverse stakeholder collaboration emerged as another critical factor. We really understand that we have to incorporate a variety of perspectives and expertise to really enhance the overall effectiveness of the project. And another key takeaway is that we understand the importance of remaining open throughout the whole process and adjusting engagement strategies to navigate through certain difficulties. And on behalf of the research team, we would like to thank the Reclaim Network again for allowing us to conduct such a meaningful project. And moving forward, we'll continue with the wealth of data that we were able to gather throughout this whole project, and then really writing up a couple of analysis papers to reflect the outcomes of the projects and share with the communities. So thank you so much for listening, and I'm happy to take any further questions later on.
Yeah, thank you very much, Thuy. It's a very interesting presentation. You've done a fantastic job as part of this this project, and we are very glad as a network to help support you, with this initiative. Without a further ado, I'm going to introduce to our second speaker today, McKenna. So she works as a senior fellow at Ecological Institute in Berlin and coordinates the institute's activities on nature-based solutions. Her work focuses on the science policy society interface, supported by cross-disciplinary research on nature-based solutions, policy, and governance, co-creation and stakeholder engagement, capacity building, and urban transformations. So she currently coordinates the Horizon Europe-funded Interlace project, aiming to strengthen urban ecosystem restoration in European Union and Latin America. So thank you very much for your time, McKenna, today. We're looking forward to your interesting presentations. Over to you.
Thanks a lot. I'm going to share my screen. I hope that it works now. Oh, please let me know. Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Yeah, that is good.
Perfect. Then yeah, thanks a lot for the invitation and for the kind introduction. As was said, my name is McKenna Davis and I work at Ecologic Institute based in Berlin. And today I am really happy to share with you a resource that I led the development of over the last 2 years, along with a colleague of mine, Natalia, who's an audience member today. So really happy to share this with you. I think that the presentation really builds nicely on the former presentation. So we're focusing today less, and the tool I'd like to show you focuses less on the participatory aspects of nature-based solutions and green and blue infrastructure as such, and rather focuses on participation around the governance side of things. So looking at the policy and the planning and the legislation and other instruments that support nature-based solutions. So I'd like to set the scene a little bit within this frame of policy, governance, and decision-making processes, and then I'll go into an introduction of the tool for you. So I thought I would just frame it a little bit. I really like this graphic.
Sorry, McKenna, I can only see sort of half the slide. I don't know if you can try sharing it again.
Oh, yeah.
So I can see the full sort of PowerPoint there, but
yeah.
No, it shows like the sort of edges are cut off. I don't know if, Prashant, can you see the same thing?
I see the same as well, yeah. Somehow this is being squeezed actually, so the sides are cut.
Okay.
Can you go back again? And is this?
Do you maybe want to share the presentation, and then I'll just tell you when to click? Sorry, that's not ideal, but I'm not sure why.
Sorry for that. Yeah, I think it's, yeah, that looks better now. It's better.
Okay, perfect. So if you just click one more time, then you see like this graphic is from the WWF, and it's focusing on the factors around successful implementation of green and blue infrastructure. And I just wanted to highlight one of the aspects that they really frame here is about inclusive governance. And I go into a little bit more detail about what we mean by that. So if you go to the next slide, please. So inclusive governance or co-governance, as was said in the previous presentation, there's lots of definitions around this, but I picked one that I think is a nice framing for the purposes of this presentation. So it's really focusing on the different processes and structures of public decision-making and management that engage people across the boundaries of public agencies and levels of government. But that's a complex definition. What does it actually mean in practice, and where is kind of the state of the art, or where do things stand around engaging different members within decision-making processes? The next slide, please. So I wanted to highlight kind of where we're at right now as a framing. In general, there's really this shift from what we can call government to governance. So it's really a shift from this kind of traditional urban development processes that are quite top-down, involve the public authorities managing a lot of these urban challenges, really having limited public involvement. And there's been a shift and a move away from this to recognize the importance of involving other stakeholders, as we heard in the previous presentation, but also within these decision-making and planning processes, so not just the implementation themselves. And these new approaches, they really welcome and sometimes even mandate the participation of different actor groups in the planning, the design, the maintenance, sometimes even the monitoring of urban areas. And in particular, this is really happening within the field of green area management in the urban landscape. So it's more than just rule setting, but really about enabling local communities to take the lead and shape the kind of future of their environments, to make the decisions that are going to affect them. So they really try these more inclusive approaches to respect and integrate different local knowledge, different traditions, take into account the local context, making sure that the policies and the frameworks that are being developed are culturally sensitive, are sustainable, are accepted by these different groups, and really trying to legitimize this community involvement and more equitable and fair, inclusive decision-making processes. But of course, this also brings with it a lot of challenges. So there's challenges about within these decision-making processes to try to address, try to give weight to and give meaning to and integrate all of these different perspectives, needs, priorities of the different stakeholder groups within the actual policy frameworks that are being developed. And then, of course, with that comes a lot of trade-offs. So between the different groups, but also within stakeholder groups, there's a lot of diversity of opinions, of preferences, of priorities, of how urban landscape should look. So really trying to balance all of those in a fair and equitable way. But the good news is there are really a lot of different tools, different policy instruments, which can really help to support this, what we call enhanced social agency. So really empowering the local community and the different stakeholders to be involved in these decision-making processes. There's this wide spectrum, if you just click one more time, please, of deep versus wide engagement. So here's just a couple of examples of what that could look like in practice, but it's really both of these are different ends of the spectrum in terms of engaging the public and different stakeholder groups within decision-making practices. Just click one more time, please. And one more time. And yeah, so then there's what I wanted to say here is that basically all of these different tools and approaches are needed for participation and for this collaborative governance, because actually there's not any kind of one-size-fits-all solution. You really have to have locally adapted, locally relevant approaches to engage the community and sustain that participation, and also keeping in mind that there's different communication and participation cultures in different areas as well. So if we go to the next slide. So I won't go into detail with this because we had it in the last presentation as well, but I just wanted to highlight here that there's different stages of co-creation and different phases. This is from a publication from the European Commission that was co-authored within the project that I'm coordinating, the Interlace project I'll introduce in a moment, and some colleagues working on that. But basically what I wanted to highlight here is that there's different approaches to this co-governance throughout co-creation processes. And in particular, I want to focus on this collaboration element. So if you just click one more time, please. I want to focus on the collaboration, which is really about influencing, negotiating, and deliberating decision-making around nature-based solutions. So if we just go to the next slide, thank you. So yeah, so I wanted to present today this tool that I was talking about before, the Urban Governance Atlas, really as a means to kind of move beyond this theory. So it's all really nice in theory, but what's actually happening in practice, and how can we foster more collaboration, more inclusion on the ground across our urban landscapes. So I'm going to present a tool that we developed within the Interlace project. As was said before, I coordinate this project. It's really an amazing project. I'm super happy to have the opportunity. It's a Horizon project, Horizon Europe funded project, so from the European Commission. It's a 4-year project. We're really trying to strengthen urban ecosystem restoration through nature-based solutions with a geographic focus on the European Union, so different European cities, and Latin America. And we have 21 organizations from 11 countries that are within this project, including 6 different cities, so 3 within Europe and 3 within Latin America. And we have lots of resources and materials available coming out of this project beyond the tool I'll show you today, which I'm happy to share with you if anybody's interested in that. So what we did, if you go to the next slide, please, within this project is we developed the Urban Governance Atlas. And what we really found from the research side of things and based on the feedback from different stakeholders and participatory processes was that there's a lack of tools, resources, concrete examples out there which really collect real world examples of policy instruments which have been implemented, which are considered to be good practices, which I'll explain in a moment, and which are really supporting nature-based solution implementation. So we wanted to create this Urban Governance Atlas, which showcases 250 policy instruments. It's a living atlas, so we hope to add more examples as well. We're really happy if anybody would like to contribute to that. Really to support this kind of ecologically coherent, but also inclusive planning for urban ecosystem restoration and green space planning globally. We want to really try to inspire global action for policymakers, decision makers, but also for more community-led and community-driven initiatives, so more bottom-up as well. And we focus on policy instruments which we have categorized as being good practices. So we have different criteria that we looked at. One of them that's most relevant today is inclusiveness. So within the design and the implementation of the policy instrument, that it was inclusive in nature. I'll give some examples in a moment. But also that they're sustainable in the long run, that they're locally appropriate, responding to the local circumstance, that they're upscalable, effective, and that, of course, they support this kind of multifunctionality aspect, addressing different challenges as well. And we highlight lessons learned from these. And I'd like to showcase a couple of these lessons learned today. So we go to the next slide. Thank you. So just to give you a little snapshot of what's actually included there, so you know where the information is coming from. We have, as I said, right now, 250 good practice policy instruments supporting green and blue infrastructure and nature-based solutions. These are focusing on mostly examples from Europe and from Latin America, but are wider examples as well, featuring 41 different countries, focusing on mostly on the municipal level. And I would like to also highlight, in terms of inclusion, we really had a collaborative approach to develop this. So we were drawing on examples and inputs from more than 48 different organizations, which is a really spectacular achievement for us. And we're really happy for the Atlas to be so inclusive in its design. So I'll go into the next slide. I just wanted to show you a geographic overview. So just to give you an idea, when I said the 41 countries, where these actually come from, as I said, a focus on Latin America and Europe. And if you go to the next slide, then you can kind of see what are the different challenges that the policy instruments addressed. Most of them, so around 95%, addressed at least 3 different societal challenges here. So we see that the most common, which makes sense, is of course green space management, but also looking at topics like human health and well-being, ecological connectivity, flood risk, and so on. So really responding to different policy needs, different sectors of policy, and different goals and ambitions that they're trying to address around the topic of nature-based solutions. We go to the next slide. When I'm talking about policy instruments, I think it's helpful maybe just to give a brief introduction of what I mean. I'm going to show you in more detail examples of each of these, but just to say there's different kinds of instruments. So I think classically we always think about this kind of regulatory top-down traditional plans, mandates, requirements, but also strategies that are coming from different governments. But we also expanded the scope here, following the literature about what can be constituted as a policy instrument. And we also have different instruments around knowledge, communication, and innovation. We have instruments that are focusing on agreements and cooperation between different stakeholders and between municipalities and government actors. And then also, of course, economic and fiscal instruments. And if you click one more time, just wanted to highlight that these were what we call formalized instruments. So we really have a focus on instruments that came from the government or municipalities on different levels. Some are regional, some are local, some are also national, but we have mostly a local level focus on this. But we also tried to include different bottom-up policy instruments. So different instruments that came from community initiatives, came from the research projects or other sources, which were then formally integrated into the planning processes and the decision-making processes of the government. So it's not the main focus of us, but we also just want to highlight that these are definitely out there. And of course, there's many more bottom-up initiatives, but we wanted to focus on those that are formalized and formally recognized by governments here. So if you go to the next slide. You don't need to look at this one in detail. It's a little bit too small, I think, anyways, to go into it. But I just wanted to kind of give a couple of these categories so you can see what we mean when we're talking about these different instruments, what they look like in practice, and highlight, if you click one more time, you can see the different types of instruments that are really inherently participatory in nature. So these are really, especially this last category of agreement-based or cooperative instruments, as you could understand from the name, but also different instruments that engage different society members in the use of public funds or in terms of knowledge and innovation and awareness raising. And yeah, within each of these categories, not only those that I highlighted here that you would think are obviously lending themselves to be more participatory, but also within the other categories, there's a really large spectrum of possibility and opportunity for engagement and participation of different stakeholders, both within the design of the policy instruments and within their implementation as well. So I thought I would give a couple of examples, make this more concrete. So if you go to the next slide and you click one more time, then you can have the first example, which is, I wanted to focus on different policy instruments across these categories, which really support participation or co-governance. So in terms of this kind of classic, what we think of top-down instrument category in terms of legislative, regulatory, and strategic instruments, I wanted to highlight one example from Flanders, which is the Blue Deal. So it's a voluntary plan of the Flemish government in Belgium that's trying to address water scarcity, and it really created different coalitions with stakeholders depending on the program or project, to include companies, associations, farmers, different knowledge institutions, but also citizens, through these different coalitions, trying to develop solutions to help prevent water scarcity and droughts. So a different approach to this kind of classic legislative instruments. If you go to the next one, then we have this more economic and fiscal side of things. So again, here there's lots of opportunities for participation and co-governance and collaboration. This example is from Poland, which was about a participatory budget. The program has been running for a while now, so since 2013, and it's really, let's say, freeing up a part of the municipal budget in order to allow citizens how to allocate those funds. It's done in a democratic way with decision making. So basically proposals can be submitted here. Then there's a democratic voting process, which also involves the wider public and the municipal actors as well. And then they really get funds to implement their vision building and their plans there for urban greening, which is a really exciting example, actually. And they've had a very high success rate with this in terms of greening areas as well. So the next category is this agreement-based or cooperative instruments, which, as the name would imply, is really lending itself very well for participation. So for this one, there's a panel called the Friends of the Steamer, which is looking in Belgium at developing the Steamer Valley. So it was developed during and as part of the master plan for redeveloping the valley. So as part of one of these legislative instruments. But there was a little bit of worry by the citizens that the master plan wouldn't be participatory after it was actually set. So there was integration of the public within the development, but then there was a question, what happens during the implementation stage? So they kind of prototyped this new governance structure and community engagement approach, and they really empowered the local residents, the local citizens, to become ambassadors, to become caretakers of the valley. And it's supported by this communication and participation strategy to support cohesion, support behavioral change, and really get stewardship of this area and support with the implementation of the master plan. And the last example I will give for now is a knowledge, communication, and innovation instrument. So it's called Strasbourg Grows. It's a program from France, which is really trying to engage residents in urban greening projects and public spaces. So there's a website, the residents can apply to the program with their different projects. ideas. And then there's also a lot of educational materials, which is really trying to inform, to empower, and to engage residents during these urban greening projects. So really trying to provide resources to engage them as well. So all different forms of participation there. So I think the biggest question then is this: how does theory translate into action? We have a lot of different examples here of what's happening in practice on the ground for different municipal action, how they're really engaging stakeholders. But we wanted to kind of draw together some of these conclusions from the Urban Governance Atlas and share with you a couple of initial findings. So if you click again, we're having an article that's coming up that we're going to publish on this topic. So I'm happy to share that with you once that's ready. But for now, a preview, let's say a little taste of what we have in there. So the first category that I wanted to highlight here is about the importance of engaging citizens and stakeholders through policy design for inclusive and locally appropriate nature-based solutions. So we're really drawing on these good practices that I highlighted in the beginning. So looking at different forms of engagement, looking at this inclusivity aspect and locally appropriate characteristics of it. And here I won't go through all of these in detail. I just wanted to give some examples of actual actions that can be useful in fostering the participation in these different policy instruments. And if you click again, I just wanted to give one more example to give this a little bit, make it a little bit more tangible what we're talking about here. So one example is within the Krakow Metropolis strategy, which is from Poland. They developed this in a partnership between 15 municipalities, so a kind of government-to-government collaboration. But they also brought in a lot of different representatives from the scientific sector, non-governmental organizations, the business and environmental institutions, as well as drawing in the public for opportunities to participate through different meetings, through forums. And they had, over 170 participants that were involved in the development of this strategy. So really a great example there. And then the other topic that I wanted to talk about in terms of the kind of good practices and how to implement these in practice is about innovating policy implementation through different aspects like citizen science, cultural activities, or public-private partnerships as different forms of collaboration that are possible there. They really encourage different diversities of collaborations. They incorporate artistic elements. They involve citizens, for example, in monitoring, trying to really help see how effective these policies are in practice and have a greater uptake of the results. And also for that one, I have one example. My last example today is about the Lisbon Urban Allotment Garden Program in Portugal. So this one is looking at sustainable urban development in the city, which is trying to create this kind of replicable or upscalable solution here to transform vacant or abandoned lots, also degraded parks, areas that aren't being used anymore, into vibrant urban allotment areas. So for different kinds of community gardening, trying to encourage gardeners, families, community groups, and school classes to participate, to take ownership, again, stewardship, and really utilize these areas for the good of the community and the good of their health and well-being as well within this. So that's it in a nutshell. I think time is flying, so I'll leave you with that. But I just wanted to say thanks a lot for the invitation again. And I think there's 250 examples, so it's hard to pick some there, but I would invite you to explore the Urban Governance Atlas. And if you have any examples you'd like to be added to it, it's still an open development process, so we'd really welcome any more examples that you'd like to share. And of course, if there's any questions, please, feel free to contact me during or after the webinar.
Yeah, thank you very much, McKenna. Very interesting presentation. So I'm going to pass it on to my colleague, Niria, to take this Q&A session. Over to you, Niria.
Thank you, Prashant. And thank you both presenters for really exciting and inspiring presentations. So far, there's 2 questions by Andrea Berardi, and they're both to Thuy, I assume because of the timing of the questions. The first question is, how were participants recruited in your case study? And then if you could clarify the outcomes of the participatory process in terms of impact. Yeah, so thank you so much for the questions. I could answer them quite quickly as well. And feel free to also reach out to me afterwards for more information. So regarding the survey, we self-administered the survey and used Prolific to recruit participants in order to also obtain a representative sample of the UK population and also to save time as well, because the project happened quite in a very short period of time. And regarding the interviews and focus groups, then the participants were drawn from first the survey respondents who live in that areas, and also we recruited participants based on snowball sampling and advertisement on social media platforms, also using our networks within the London Borough of Hammersmith and Fulham as well to reach out and pass down the advertisement for the interviews and focus groups. And regarding the outcomes of the participatory process, really in terms of the impacts. So in regarding how what we achieve after the focus groups, then crucial outcomes, in our opinions, include consensus regardless of people's backgrounds on the context-sensitive green space design, and also very novel perspectives on co-design that have not been identified in previous methods. So, for example, we were able to extract a lot of new topics in that emerged only in the focus groups. So, for example, there was the findings of the focus group reveal a prevailing mistrust of the purpose for them to join public consultation events, which actually negatively affecting their tendency to participate. There are also the incongruence in value systems, proving to be the barrier for participants. And this only emerged in the focus groups. So coming back to my presentation on the causal loop diagram as well. So we are creating multiple causal loop diagrams, one for the interviews, one consolidate findings from the focus groups, and then we'll create a consolidated causal loop diagram and highlighted those that only emerged during the focus group to really highlight the impacts when people of different backgrounds, people of different level of green space use come together and they come to consensus. So these are the two major key outcomes of the focus groups, but there are many more on that, and the timing is a little bit limited. So feel free to reach out to me later so we can I can provide a more comprehensive answer.
Thank you, Thuy. There's another question from Fatima Andrade for McKenna. And the question is, thank you for a very inspiring presentation, very inspiring presentations in plural. I would like to ask Prof. McKenna how to organize so many different groups and areas to finalize in the Atlas. I believe it's not only with academic people.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks a lot for the question. So we followed what we call, little jargony, the agile process for developing the Atlas. So we really tried to have a small, what we call impact task force. So a select group of different representatives from the target audiences that we were trying to reach. So from cities, from municipalities, from the research community, from planners. So looking at different stakeholder groups and involve them in the design process. And that was really helping us to kind of figure out which elements of the Atlas or of these policy instruments are most relevant for them that we wanted to address. And then in terms of the actual input of the policy instruments, we used a very large social media network campaign, basically to invite through our networks, but also far beyond, different individuals who were familiar with, involved in developing or involved in researching in some way connected to different policy instruments. So within the European context, there was quite a large data set already from existing publications that we expanded on to identify these policy instruments. In the Latin American context, it was a really large challenge just because there hasn't been so much centralized research done to identify these instruments yet. So we really pulled on our networks very strongly there, both within academia, but also outside, and really working together with cities to have them input their lessons learned and other things so that it's really more real world experiences, let's say. So less what you can find from the literature and really focusing on what happened in practice and what can other cities or municipalities learn from that.
Thank you, McKenna. I had a somehow related question for you in terms of the atlas, and is how you managed to get all the case studies, because you mentioned that you were focused in Europe and Latin America, but you had some examples in Africa and in Central Asia. And I was wondering whether you think like language, for example, is a like very strong barrier to get to know the examples that are taking place in different countries. Like what were the challenges in terms of gathering the case studies?
Yeah, thanks a lot for the question. It was indeed a challenge. As I said, in Europe, it's a little bit easier because there's a lot of EU-funded research focusing on this topic. So of course, we can build on those networks and those publications and experiences. Within the Latin American context, even though obviously we did the searches and did our outreach within Spanish, there's still a language issue. And what I mean by that is that the concept or the term nature-based solutions hasn't really been institutionalized there yet. So we really tried to have a long list of other concepts, other terms relating to nature-based solutions, supporting the same principles of nature-based solutions, and try to use that as a way to communicate what we're looking for in terms of policy instruments there. So there was a lot within that framework. And for that, I have a colleague, Natalia, who's also here, who is from Colombia, who was instrumental in creating this. And she worked in the planning department within Bogota. And so also had like a very good insight about what kind of terms are being used within this Latin American context. But definitely, I have to say the focus was on these two geographic areas because of the focus of our research project. But there's so many more examples out there on a global scale, and especially within Asia, within Africa, that are very underrepresented here because it wasn't our focus. But I think with some targeted research and outreach, then there's many, many more examples that could be collected from those areas as well. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for your questions, and thank you the two presenters for these beautiful presentations. I hand over to Prashant for last words.
Yeah, so thank you very much for both our speakers and Anelia for chairing this session. I think it was fascinating presentations, and they bring a diversity of the experience and the topic areas which are very relevant actually when it comes to the implementation of the nature-based solutions in urban or rural environments. So before we close this session, I take an opportunity to introduce you to our next webinar series. So we'll have two speakers. So one is Dr. Sophia Roberts. So she will be talking about the community perception of new green space interventions, and especially the case of Ryle in North Wales. And she comes from Bangor, and we got our own, actually, the founding director of the Institute for Sustainability, Professor Laurence Jones, and he will be talking about the social transformation through research and action, and taking actually the Institute for Sustainability, as a case study. So next, please. So before you go, so if you are not a member of the network, so you got an opportunity to be a member. There's no charge for that. You just go to the Reclaim Network website and you can fill that form. You will start getting the information from there. And if you are on LinkedIn, you could find us there for the updates, as well as on the X, which is, I think, is the X Twitter. So you can follow us and get the updates on our activities of the network. Just to close, actually, I would like to also ask you to we have just launched a resource page on our Reclaim Network website. So if you have got any papers, reports, videos, or the presentations, and if you'd like that to be shared with our 400 or 500 members in the in the network, you could just submit them, and you can benefit actually in terms of getting the dissemination, but the people can benefit actually seeing your the work. So I think we can post the link in the chat box, but you can also find on the Reclaim Network webpage, and you just go under resources. It's a little form. You just click on that form, and you can submit your outputs there, and it will help us actually to build a database, but also the colleagues to look around your work and possibly cite it and refer it in their own works. So with that, I would like to thank everyone again for your time and attending it, all our audience, but also our speakers again, and the chair and the guys actually, Charlotte, Mark, and the CSA for helping organizing in the background. So with that, I would like to thank you again and see you next month. Bye for now.
Thank you very much. Bye.